Hello, everybody, and welcome to another Checkbox webinar. I'm very, very excited to have you join us on this session, Driving Efficiencies at Scale, taking a real-world perspective for in-house teams. My name is Evan Wong. I'm the co-founder and CEO of Checkbox. And today I have the amazing, fabulous Caryn Sandler from Gilbert Tobin law firm. For those of you who have never heard of Checkbox before, we're a no-code automation platform built for legal teams to use drag and drop to build your own automation software. Caryn, I'm really excited to have you here. And of course, I had to give you the same amazing introduction that I gave in an email that I sent recently that razzled and dazzled you in an introduction. But how about you introduce yourself briefly for those of them who have not met you before?
Thanks, Evan, and lovely to be here today. Hope everyone is well. I'm obviously Caryn Sandler. I lead the Legal Service Innovation team and the G&T Innovate team at Gilbert Tobin. And we look at both optimizing efficiencies internally within Gilbert Tobin, which is a national Australia law firm with offices in Sydney, Melbourne and Perth. And we focus very heavily on regulatory transactions and disputes. And I also lead the G&T Innovate team, which really works quite extensively with in-house legal functions in optimizing their own transformation journeys. So really understanding their pain points, looking at various technologies and the like for them.
Awesome. Well, today's conversation is going to be focused really around the efficiencies and the drivers for efficiencies in in-house teams. And in particular, I want to also talk to Caryn about what she's seeing in legal teams and how they've been leveraging certain technologies, and in particular, some of the more sort of recent technologies around no code as well, as that's been something that's come up in a few conversations that I've had, feedback to sort of talk about those types of topics. So I'm going to stop sharing the screen here. This is going to be a fireside chat, so we won't do PowerPoint by death. I'll stop sharing that for a moment. Excellent. So Caryn, how about we kind of start off with talking about what you see as some of the common drivers for automation, given that you work with so many different in-house teams. What are the trends that you're seeing emerge across all of them?
Yeah, so I think it really stems from the fact that we operate in a really complex environment. For those of you who've heard the term VUCA, I think it really sums up the world in which in-house functions sort of operate, being it's volatile, it's uncertain, it's complex, and it also is full of ambiguity. And, compounded with that is really in-house legal functions working within a highly regulated environment. And with that, we've seen a really big increase in the in-house teams that I work with both, across Asia Pac, see a really big increase in the volume of legal work that comes their way, because of the complex environment, because of this highly regulated landscape. But what we're actually seeing is not a commensurate increase in the actual resources to actually deliver that legal work. So, with that higher community expectations, just that higher client expectations and that increase in volume of work, in-house legal functions are really having to transform the way in which they work because they've got the same resource base. So they're having to be creative, think about how they can potentially leverage technology, how can they actually improve their processes to make sure that they can actually sustain the volume of legal work that comes their way, rather than having to, work ridiculously long hours. And of course, many of them have to do that at the moment, but it's about trying to find a sustainable operating model to enable them to actually deliver on that legal work.
Absolutely. And that's why of the recent years as well, it's almost a joke that everyone's talking about doing more with less. It's like the overused phrase because of that resource constraint, but that kind of growing top line of work that's still coming into the funnel. Have you seen that change actually in light of sort of the pandemic and the recent lockdowns? I mean, I think it's remiss of us not to address that at that dynamic that's been introduced. So how has that sort of fed into the digitalization or the automation agenda?
Yes, I certainly think it has had an impact. I think what we're seeing is that it's really driven in-house legal functions and GCs to rethink the way in which they operate. Obviously everyone was thrown from a period of working in the office, most of them now working at home. but it's really started them thinking about, well, how do we actually deliver this through potentially technology? So absolutely made them think about it. However, I will say that whilst there is that really goodwill, that a lot of goodwill in that space and that real desire to push ahead and transform, and we're seeing a lot of that. I mean, if I reflect on instructions that we received at the back end of last year, for example, they almost quadrupled in nature. So it really put a sharp focus on digital transformation in the context of legal. And also, I think what we saw is that was not only driven by the in-house function, it was driven by the broader organization, because for every organization has had to rethink the way in which they operate, and that focus on technology, focus on improved process. So, in-house function are expected to follow suit in that. So the pandemic definitely, in my view, escalated and sort of put us on that upwards trajectory. I think what is going to be interesting, particularly over the next few months, is despite that enormous goodwill in the context of let's digitally enable ourselves, let's increase our capability, let's improve our processes, let's look at technology. I think it's challenged with the fact that I do think some budgets have been cut, given there is so much uncertainty around with the pandemic. And I also think the other challenge people are facing at the moment is just sheer exhaustion. People have cancelled holidays, they're in lockdown on and off, or constantly in lockdown, wherever one is. So I think those drivers and how that play out is going to be interesting, but I still think the end result will be a significant focus on this and an increasing sort of focus on it, despite maybe what might be seen as a bit of a downturn of the next couple of months in terms of people having the space and time to reflect on this, but it might kick up again next year.
Absolutely. And it's really interesting you mentioned the fatigue point, because I think often when I have these conversations, it's always about sort of right now there's no space because we're still looking like there's no prioritization because we're focusing on, BAU, or there's no budgets and there's resource cuts. But no one's actually addressing just the human element of the fact that there is fatigue. There is, that all the joys of like leaving interstate on weekends or going on road trips and things like that have been taken away from us, or even going down to the pubs for a wine or for a beer has been taken away. And that does drain at sort of our work lives. And it's really interesting that you mentioned that human element, because I don't think it gets talked about enough.
Absolutely. And I think, look, as it is, there is a delicate balance between doing BAU and then really thinking about how you can continuously improve your function. So I think, removing the pandemic, you've got that as the status quo. Like that is the issue that you face all the time. And when I work with in-house legal functions over the last 5 years or so, and that is the constant pressure that we see. It's this difficulty in balancing and that challenge in balancing BAU as well as that continuous improvement. But now I just think it's further escalated off the back of the pandemic.
Absolutely. And so then what would be your advice? I mean, is it that we should be sitting on our hands and waiting for this thing to blow over? Or how can people, start getting involved in automation in this type of environment?
Yeah, look, I don't think the answer is to sit on one's hands. I think one needs to be realistic about what one can manage over the next 6 to 12 months. So I think, I'm very much a proponent of doing some quick wins. I do believe there are many within an in-house function, that might just require a bit of experimentation, might require a process change, might require, some capability development. So there's lots of things that one can do that can actually get you along that journey. And the reason why I like that is because I think it also sets that momentum. When people start seeing change, they then are far more willing to engage with that change. And I think that is the start and the important start of any transformation journey. In saying that though, whilst I am a proponent of quick wins and I will always support that, I do think you do need to be quite planful in approach. So I do think, for example, the way in which we go into organizations and we go through quite a systematic sort of methodology around, identifying where the pain points are, but really understanding those root causes, looking at what one can do. And it's not always technology. It sometimes is technology, but it's obviously not always technology. But really having that planful approach about what is really achievable, thinking about the constraints as well, whether that be resources, business as usual, who's going to help with those transformation initiatives. What does that look like for 6 months? What does that look like for 6 to 12 months? What does that look like beyond that. What are you trying to do, and what are you trying to achieve, and what are your goals and aims as an internal sort of legal function? And I think, so my view would be start with those quick wins. Don't delay those things, because you can do them. And sometimes just trying and iterating gets you along the way, but you also learn from that. And that's part of what we're trying to achieve over here, is actually developing capability in the transformation space. And everyone can do it, and everyone should be a part of that. I feel very passionately around that. It shouldn't only be led with one person in an organization, or, only an outsider. You need to absolutely bring the team together and all focus on it as a core goal of that team, but then also being quite planful in approach. And if you've got someone internally that you can leverage, absolutely. Otherwise, there are organizations out there that can support. As I said, we support in different ways for in-house functions, but absolutely something that we need, that people should consider.
Absolutely. And I was about to mention it, but you did it before I did, which is it is about developing capability as well. And you'll only do that through, trying and testing it yourself.
Yeah.
And those quick wins are really important, because often those types of projects don't just touch, the legal team, it touches the rest of the business. And in fact, often the buy-in from the rest of the business is required to get the budget for those bigger, more planful types of projects, right? Those larger scale projects. And so even back to the point that you made before, like it's important to understand that legal isn't just, when you look at sort of transformation projects, legal is not a silo within an organization. Like it's in-house. It's called in-house because it's part of, a larger organization. And even when you look at, say, one of the legal processes that might be involved with a document being generated, the question is, why is that document being generated? It's maybe part of a broader procurement process, and therefore, there's quick wins to be done there and demonstrated, and bring the other parts of the business along with the journey as well.
Absolutely.
Awesome. So I guess in terms of them, we're talking about the efficiencies that people are looking for and how to get started, and sort of quick wins and more planful approach. What are some of the types of the low value work that you are seeing that is ripe for automation? Because I don't believe all work is going to be ripe or suited for automation. So what have you been seeing as some of those quick wins in the market?
Absolutely, Evan. And I completely agree with you in that not all work is suitable for automation. But the way in which we like to think about it is really look at that low-hanging fruit, that low complex, low value work that really lawyers might not need to be doing on a daily basis, so they can actually focus their time and energy on the work that matters. And particularly in an environment where you have so much work coming in and not enough bandwidth, you want to get rid, or at least streamline, as much of that low hanging fruit. So areas that I'm seeing legal corporate legal organizations sort of really focus on is document automation where it makes sense. So, if we think about what was the original efficiency driver in legal, even, going back 8 years ago or so, it really is document automation. It's rather than actually, taking a document and, developing it from scratch or using a precedent and manually filling in all the information. You actually can answer a series of questions, which enables you to populate that. And what I'm seeing also is where there are documents that are of the sort of lower value, low complexity, there is certainly a trend of the corporate legal departments trying to push that onto the business, so that the business themselves can develop a first cut of that document, or alternately, they've got a precedent that they can work with. They know that is the actual finalized document. So it also pushes a level of compliance as well, rather than, using a document that you find in your top drawer. But then they can absolutely do it. And that typically drives a lot of efficiency, and it also then frees up the legal function to not do that type of work. But you need to be very selective around the work that you do, and you also want to make sure that you've got those documents being quite repetitive in nature, and also that you do a sufficient number of them to make it worthwhile to actually automate. Don't go ahead and automate something that you use twice a year. Do something that you use very frequently. People always talk about the sort of NDA or whatever other agreements sort of sit in a similar camp. The other area we're really seeing is a focus on intake and triage. And that is because there is a common pain point that we see across in-house functions around, getting instruction by the water cooler, or emails coming through, or, picking up the phone. So a wide variety of intake, methods. And then with that, there often comes a level of complexity because it's a back and forth constantly around, not providing instructions in a very consistent and seamless way. The legal function might require something additional that has not been provided, and then they need to go back to the business, and there's that backwards and forwards. So that intake and sort of triage process is something that we're certainly seeing a really big focus on. And again, that's quite administrative in nature. You want to get your instructions and you want to get moving on the actual legal work. The other area that we're seeing a lot of focus on is really that workflow. So, signing of documents, delegated authorities, trying to find out who is suitable to sign which documents, also just the actual negotiation phase. So there is certainly quite a focus on that at the moment, because yes, again, you want to actually develop that document, you want to actually provide legal advice in that way, but then, following that document in terms of people adding comments and then going out to the third party and then getting their comments back, you want to actually have that in a contained system. So that's another area we're certainly seeing a lot of focus on. And then, to a lesser degree, but absolutely, we're starting to see lots of in-house functions focused on this as well, is really that expertise automation. So, where there are some particular topics that maybe come into the legal function as questions on a regular basis. Again, similar like what you would do with the document automation, except you're not producing necessarily a document at the end, you're producing an outcome or a piece of advice. So again, that has been really something that people are sort of focusing on. And I think the focus on this has been interesting because I think the legal market probably has not been blown away with what AI has done more broadly within the industry. We certainly haven't seen the disruption of, jobs and all that kind of stuff that we possibly saw in papers, or at least promised in papers over the last sort of 3 to 4 years or whatever. So, these areas where you can really put some level of rules-based analytics around it can really be helpful.
Absolutely. That's really thorough. And the reason I was kind of like smiling when you were talking about intake and triage and the whole manual process with legal is, in my mind, I was thinking about our friends in the IT department and how they had to deal with that for so many years. And you can imagine how many people would go and say, I forgot my password. How do I download this app and all these things? And eventually they came up with the IT ticketing system, right?
Yep.
So like, rarely would you expect to be next to the water cooler or sending an email to IT and telling them, they'll like submit a ticket. And I feel like legal is getting to that point now where they're like, hold on a second, we should be doing that as well. Which is why I was kind of smiling at that. Yeah. I was thinking about our friends in IT. And it's really interesting that you mentioned the workflow piece as well, because I guess in a much more physical, like, pre-pandemic, where a lot of work was physical, where legal teams were sitting next to the business clients and next to their colleagues. I remember a lot of the processes, even from document execution, would be a cover sheet, like a physical cover sheet that you staple to the top of a document, like an agreement, and you walk that around the office and you have all the people sign it off, and it's like, oh, I've got all the signatures, we can execute this document now. And I'm starting to see organizations come up with new solutions now, because you just can't do that anymore. You can't just walk a physical paper around. And the next best alternative nowadays is these crazy email threads of this document with versioning control issues and just it's a mess. So, finding solutions to kind of just facilitate what was very manual physical workflows and making them digital is definitely something that I'm seeing as well. So I completely resonate with all those that you mentioned.
Absolutely. And there's also then a focus on compliance as well. As you say, if you've got a hard copy document, then ultimately that document has to go somewhere. And sometimes you do find that in the top drawer. Alternately, it lands up in some form of system or some person's sort of PC somewhere. So having that again in a sort of standardized way is really front of mind as we operate in a far more compliance-driven world. So I think that's driving it as well.
Awesome. Now, we've talked a lot about kind of the problems and opportunities. Let's talk solutions, right? We kind of want to give some people here some takeaway sort of tips and tricks in terms of how to maybe, let's start with how we might go and even work out what solution is the best fit for the problems that we may have, because like all markets and all solutions markets, there's a lot of solutions there, and there's quite a lot of noise. And what's the difference between solution X versus solution Y? Or am I even looking at the correct category of solutions, right? Like, how do you even go about that process? Like, what's been your experience?
Yeah, look, and I'll be completely honest over here and say it's hard. It's really hard. And the reason why it is so hard is because it is a really interesting legal technology landscape out there. And it changes on a daily basis. Our effect on myself and my team, we do this on a daily basis, and it can still even become confusing for us. So I think having a good handle on what is out there is absolutely critical. Obviously identifying your pain points and really understanding what the causes are and what you're trying to achieve, and then also having a better understanding as to what your sort of short, medium term and long term goals are. Because I think when you are selecting technology products, you do need to think about that, and you do need to think about how they all are going to integrate and how they're going to work within your existing infrastructure as well. I think the challenge that I have seen in-house find over here is that they don't necessarily have access always to the IT department. The IT department is stretched as having to support the entire organization, so they are having to sort of navigate them themselves. So I think in terms of how to find best fit technologies is if you can engage a third party to assist with that, that'd be great. Alternatively, if you've got someone internally who really follows this and really has a good understanding of what that landscape looks like, then best to have a look at various demos or whatever you look at. But again, think about it in the context of the integration. Think about it in the context of your current technology stack, what you can use, what the pros and cons of all of them are, and how easy they are to use as well. Because in terms of change management, that becomes absolutely critical.
Absolutely. And it's interesting because I was talking to you before this and mentioning that in the US, the market over there is quite different in the way they approach these, where they have a very strong sort of reliance on those third parties that literally do this for a living, right? Like they keep tabs on the market, they do the vendor sort of evaluation and really help with the design of the process, because even before you get to the tech, there's getting your house in order from like a process and documentation perspective. And if you're a legal team, there's, you might have paralegals or support staff that can help you with that, but it is a whole entire capability, and it's also in itself time, which I think lawyers, as we've been talking about, have very little of. So it's not a bad idea to get some help. Yeah, absolutely. Cool. And you mentioned as well just now in your response around IT teams, right? Like they're so busy supporting all these different departments in the business, and often legal just isn't one of those priorities or the problems that legal needs to solve, unfortunately. And that kind of really brings to light that new, well, I say new, but it's kind of been around for a few years now, but definitely new in terms of the way it's taken off in the last maybe 12 months. And that's a concept of no code and how no code has been applied to legal. I know that from my perspective, I've seen investors globally, frothing about no code in all types of industries.
Yeah.
I'm obviously very passionate about no code in legal. But from your perspective, how do you know if no code is the right sort of solution for the problems that you're solving?
Yeah, look, I think you need to understand those problems that you are solving, and you need to then look and see whether the capability exists in that technology that you're looking at. I think what has been really interesting about no code is, to exactly your point, is that IT, have the best of intentions, and I always say every legal function needs to make friends with their IT team, because you're going to need them, particularly over the next sort of 5 to 10 years. But the reality is, you don't always have access to developers and the like, and also just generally, as I said, they are looking and supporting at a large number of business units within the actual organization, not just the legal function. I suppose the benefits of no code, and we're seeing quite a significant increase in in-house legal functions looking at no code, particularly where that technology is very good in the rules-based, technologies. As I said, AI is probably a little bit away, but the reality is the technology is excellent when we're talking about those rules-based technologies, and when we're thinking about some of the key problems, the triage, the document automation, the expertise apps, and the like. But I think one needs to be very cautious as to how one selects no code. And the reason I say that is because the benefits of no code means that you could have a paralegal, for example, in your in-house function, or even some of the lawyers who have a really big interest in that if they've got some time to play around with it. And you can literally, because of the way in which you can develop it, you can actually just go about sort of almost embedding your process and the way in which you think about your legal work in the actual technology to enable you to produce an output or an app or whatever that looks like. Again, in my view, the devil is always in the details. So if anyone is looking at no-code apps, I would encourage them to really play around with the back end, really understand that, because if you don't have access to sort of developers and the like, and you wanting to just use any person to be able to get up to speed and also sort of drive your development of those particular apps, it's really critical for you to get across that.
I completely agree. I mean, if the proposition in itself is that anyone can do it, you can just drag and drop, then obviously the evaluation process should, really look into the back end and ideally have your hands-on experience with it. Completely agree. And I guess how does I know that you mentioned earlier in your introduction, G&T works with in-house. Do you guys do much work with no code as well, in particular, no code platforms, and how do you support in-house teams on that front?
Yeah, absolutely. So we work with a number of no-code platforms, and we do it in two different ways. One being we use it internally for the Gilbert and Tobin business. So whether it be our lawyers interfacing with the technology on a day-to-day basis in particular areas. But what we also are doing is developing those no-code apps for engagement with our clients directly. So for example, if we're needing to get particular information from a client on a regular basis, or alternately, have a workflow in place, we can then develop the apps to support that. So that's the way in which we do it in the internal Gilbert and Tobin side. It just looks so much more sophisticated than sending an email and asking for information. And it also just means that, again, you've got that compliance point. You've got that idea of, we know exactly how we're going to do this. We don't have to then develop a new form or whatever that looks like. And then secondly, the way in which we are supporting in-house functions is, supporting them through the design process where they are actually wanting to leverage no-code apps. And also, in addition to that, really, some of them have their own paralegals, for example, their own lawyers internally, or anyone within their team that are actually developing some of the apps using the no-code platform. But then also where they might require something urgently, or whether they might require some additional sophistication in, one's knowledge around the actual no-code app, then we support them as well. So I think it's probably a blurred approach, and we do it depending on the needs of the clients effectively, and we shift accordingly.
Awesome. Brilliant. Now, for those of you who are on the call here, if you have any questions, just a reminder, you can type that in now. We're about to head into Q&A as well. So feel free to type in the questions there, and it'll come through, and I'll sort of pitch them through to Caryn. In the meantime as well, really quickly, let me just bring up, because we're just at the hour here, and before we kind of move into Q&A, just a quick one that on the next part of our series, just really quickly here are sort of my and Caryn's contact details, well, the email, and feel free to connect with myself on LinkedIn as well. But at our next webinar, we're going to have some of our friends from PwC New Law talk about some of the trends that they're seeing for legal tech investments in in-house. So that's going to be on the 3rd of September with myself again. So really excited for that session. But with that, let's quickly jump back over here to Q&A, which we've got a question here, Caryn, which is, what are some of the most popular no-code platforms, and what are they mostly used for? That's from Chris. Thanks, Chris.
Yeah, absolutely. So there are quite a number of no-code platforms on the market, obviously Checkbox being one of them, and very easy to use. Checkbox, very intuitive. I'm seeing a lot of clients have a lot of success with them. And then there are other sort of, providers, Neota Logic, who've been in the market for a while as well. Joseph has a different form of sort of no-code platform as well. So there's a couple. I think the one thing to always bear in mind is really understand what you are looking for in terms of your journey and what you're wanting to use it for. So I've seen, no-code platforms being used for that intake and triage system. Then I've also seen matter management systems being used for that as well. So I think one needs to really understand what you're wanting and what you're wanting to achieve through your technology, but they're quite flexible. And a lot of the systems, whether you're thinking about document automation, matter management, intake and triage, expertise apps, a lot of them are rules-based. So you do see some overlapping functionality, but where I'm certainly seeing no code is expertise apps, absolutely. So for example, if there are repeat tasks that are being done either by the business or alternately by the legal function, that they are done in no code apps. So that might be developing, as I said, an NDA, it might be developing a SaaS agreement. It might be, the differences between a contractor and an employee, sorry. So, what is the actual outcome? And, if that is a question that comes into a legal department quite regularly, you can actually do that with a series of questions. And really what you're doing is you're almost mirroring the logic that the lawyer would go through. What were the questions that you would actually ask when you are developing that? So, those are areas I'm seeing, and obviously the document automation piece, and definitely that workflow piece as well. So, starting developing, let's say, for example, an NDA, and then moving it through to signing, and actually storing it in a repository as well.
And Caryn, it's interesting because no code almost has a different advantage during this sort of much more volatile environment as well. Because when you're talking about kind of expertise apps, what it triggered in my mind was, I remember one of our customers had a use case where, because of the pandemic, there were changes to the way that they would handle payments with some of their suppliers, and how they handled things like force majeure in contracts and things like that. Now, a lot of that then extends outside of the legal team and ends up being part of their sort of customer support or their first line teams who aren't part of the legal team, but need to administer and interface with the customers on those policies that have suddenly popped up overnight, right? And so they were able to use no-code platforms to very quickly drum up those expertise apps that now are able to help those frontline staff get it right, as you say, in terms of compliance, with clarity, and have that drummed up really quickly without sort of the coding experience required. So that's a very interesting dynamic that I've seen, the advantage that's come out of sort of the pandemic and having sort of these nimble no-code platforms.
Absolutely. And I think the other thing to really bear in mind is it's not unique to a legal function. So I think there is lots of other opportunity within an organization to use these types of rule-based technologies. I even reflect about something that I'm doing at the moment, and I'm using a no-code app for a survey. So I think, if one thinks about it, there are lots of different applications, and it doesn't only have to be unique to the legal function. And that the reason why I mention that is that sometimes can be quite powerful, because obviously there are often constraints in terms of bringing new technologies into an organization. So if there is some form of business case that promotes the no-code app beyond just the legal function, sometimes I have seen that in-house functions have a better chance of getting that into the actual organization if it is what they need to do.
Absolutely. And we've got another question here from Pradeep. It's a really good question, actually. So he says, although no code and low code are being promoted a lot, he finds that a solution requires a lot of knowledge of the database, backends, etc., and that is typically beyond the capability of a business user without expertise in IT. So what are your thoughts on that, Caryn?
Yeah, so I think at first blush that sometimes can be true, but I actually think if one spends and devotes enough time to learning these systems, I do think you will understand quite quickly. Like, for example, I've got team members who have absolutely no technology background, nothing whatsoever. They are lawyers by background. They work within my team, so the Legal Service Innovation team, but they are actually, as I said, no IT background, and they understand everything. They understand how it fits in with the back-end databases. In saying that, though, you still do need to have time, irrespective. And I'm not going to say over here that you're going to learn this in 2 hours. You're not going to. It's like anything, you know, learning to ride a bike. You know, it takes a bit of time. You can all do it, and I do believe they are simple enough if they are the right ones. They are simple enough to learn. But yes, one definitely needs to invest that time in it to understand it and understand all the functionality. And then I would also say, you know, speak to the actual no-code provider to get support from them as well. You know, they know their product inside out, and they are an enormous wealth of information, and you know, typically are really responsive as well. So you can get over that hurdle. But where I've seen it work really well is, for example, if there's a paralegal dedicated to this within a in-house function who really gets across it and understands it quite well.
Absolutely. I can second that as well. I mean, most of our users are literally paralegals or lawyers, and even outside of the legal space, they're, you know, HR professionals as an example, right? And it's really interesting because I think that it you know, I'm on a lot of sort of forums talking about sort of the future of the legal profession and the careers that particularly young people can take as well. And almost this has created a new thread of like a career path for lawyers or paralegals, where you can really develop the legal operations skill set or the transformation skill set, and you pick these things up like project management and you know, life cycle, you know, application life cycle management and things like that. And in one of our clients, we had one of the paralegals there go from, you know, your traditional paralegal skill set to becoming actually a very instrumental part of the legal team, because now she manages all of the sort of innovation projects, and that was really inspired by tools, right? Like no code coming in and requiring that capability. So I don't doubt the fact that it's actually quite a positive thing, if anything, for the industry, because it's really introducing new and exciting skill sets.
Yep, absolutely.
Awesome. Very last question here is, we talk a lot about technology, but from your perspective, and I know that we both have talked about this before, but technology in itself is not always the answer. Like, you can't just have good tech and then implement it. What are some of the considerations that you make when implementing technology that's actually beyond the technology itself?
Yeah, absolutely. In fact, I really firmly believe that. I always say also, if you use technology or embed technology on a process that is broken, you only make that process far more inefficient. So I think it's something, you know, one should definitely think about. And I don't believe technology is a solution for absolutely everything. And, you know, we've touched on it a little bit before as well. There is so much that one needs to do in getting the house in order first. So ensuring, you know, if you're going to automate a document using no code, you need to first make sure your document is the right document and that it accords to, you know, the in-house positions and the like. So there is a bit of knowledge management in there. Just generally, you know, you need to rethink your processes. You know, let's say, for example, the negotiation and signing process at the moment is less than ideal. Then there's no point in directly mirroring that using technology. You want to refine that. And I think, you know, just getting on a whiteboard and process mapping, and I think lawyers are often very scared about doing those things. You know, it's trial and error. It's not as hard. It's getting on a board, basically mapping out all the various steps that you get to. You don't have to go into such granular detail, but then looking at some stuff with a fresh lens and say, you know what, and try get some diversity in that room, try get people that work with it. So I'm very mindful of always bringing in stakeholders. For example, you want to have the voice of the business. So don't do it only from the legal perspective. You want to ensure that whatever you are doing is going to be a fit for purpose solution for the broader organization as well. But get on a whiteboard, basically map out how could this process be better. So I think process optimization is absolutely critical alongside the technology piece, and that's always done in the front end. So really focus, be planful around that design piece up front, even if sometimes that feels a little bit painful and might take up a bit of time. The end outcome is so worth it, because I can't tell you how many times, Evan, I get called in to say, we've implemented a new technology and it hasn't worked. And then you have to sort of unravel it and, you know, whatever that looks like. But that will get you a very, you know, a better position. And like, for example, you know, we spent a lot of time doing diagnostics up front on anything we do, whether internally at GNT or alternately when working with clients. So that process piece is critical, that design piece. But then the other thing I would say to you is capability. Is another one that is absolutely critical. So, you know, everyone's heard of T-shaped models, delta models, O-shaped models, and the like, really thinking about the skill sets that you need when you are investing in technology and when you are driving technology adoption within the organization, and change management, for me, is probably the most critical thing, because even if you think about like an intake and triage model, so for example, intake, you know, if you normally have, or you take instructions by being at a water cooler or picking up a phone, that often is far easier for the business. It might not be easier for legal, but it might be far easier for the business to actually take on that. Or provide instruction like that. And now you're going to basically force them into filling out a form. So you really need to engage with the business and also think about what their change management looks like, which is critical.
Yeah, absolutely. And that can be a whole session in itself on how you even, you know, all the sort of tactics and strategies in conducting these change management strategies, because as you say, you're really you know, on one view, if you don't sell it, you know, if you don't sell it well internally, you would be asking them to take on what they used to do, but just in a much more difficult way. And so there needs to be you know, methods and tactics, even as explaining as, you know, now you can get it 24/7 without having to wait in the legal queue. Like, you can get it much faster by taking this type of method. And there's many other ways you can do that. So that I completely agree with that. Awesome. Now we're basically at time now, and thank you for everyone for your amazing questions and your comments along the way as well. So if you really enjoyed this, feel free to again reach out to Caryn or myself after this webinar. You can follow, whoops, wrong way, mirrored image, Checkbox here at these socials as well. And hopefully we'll catch you at the next Checkbox webinar. Thank you so much, Caryn, for joining me. I always have so much fun talking to you and learn a lot along the way as well.
Thanks, Evan. Lovely to be here. And thank you all for tuning in.
All right. See ya.